Oh no, I don't want to hop on a plane. I yeah, I have over 5 million American points still in my bank.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so I don't ever really dip into them. Maybe at some point when I'm retired or whatever. I have no idea.
Yeah, you're like George Clooney and Up in the Air.
I might be down in the ground.
We can through the presentation.
Exactly, exactly.
Sounds like a plan.
And I'll be responsible for hitting the start recording button, and then I'll compile the program and I'll send it to you immediately after we're done.
Okay, that would be fantastic.
How many people did we have registered?
I just checked. We're still streaming in, but it looks about around 30 this time.
Okay.
Some of the names from the last couple, so
yeah.
We'll see.
And how is the weather in St. Louis?
Hot and steamy.
We're back to hot and humid, our typical summer. Previous 2 weeks we were only high of like 80 and low humidity, so it was unseasonably cool. But now we're back into the 90s with the high humidity. So
we've been Portland has been in the hundreds this year, and
really,
and we had a shift on Friday. My wife said that huge storms and stuff moving in, which is great for the fires because we've got, in Oregon alone, we have over 1 million acres on fire.
Oh wow!
But yeah, so now it's raining right now, which is, I mean, it's 78 degrees, but it's raining, you know.
Sounds like an idiot. Yeah, I was up in Seattle about a month ago, and I went up to the Cascades, and yeah, it was like 100 degrees up there at that time. And I know they're having big fires. I think everybody's having fires up there.
It's not good. Yeah, not good.
All right. Well, I'm going to, just so we can see people signing on, I'm going to go ahead and start the webinar. We're in practice mode now, so they'll be able to hear everything we say, if everyone's good with that. And so then we'll give it a few minutes, and Dave will kick us off when we have a significant amount of people join.
Great. And as soon as I hear you talking, I will hit the start record button.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
You bet.
All right, we are started.
Mine still says practice. Oh, there we go. No, mine still. So we didn't start the broadcast. You just took us out of practice mode.
Yes, so I think they can see our screens, and once we start broadcast, and so now if you look under attendees, we can see who has joined on aside from organizers. But once we start the broadcast, we'll be ready to go. That prospect's on from Oregon.
Yeah. How many people are
registered? 30 registered, so we'll see. We're not live. Yeah, so we can talk.
Okay.
We have, it's just noon now, we have 9 people on. So if we want to wait, give it a couple more minutes, or... Oh, no. Vision Care Associates is on now.
Just like the last time, we have no idea how many people are on in each one of these locations. We know who the doctors think we had last time.
Yeah, and I got some emails that, is this one going to be on the website kind of thing? And
Yeah.
Some might be.
Yeah, Dr. Rinkoff was asking about that.
Yeah, and where is he? iExpress, Eric Johnson was asking about that as well. We had 30 register, and we're up to 13 on, so I'm not sure when we want to
I think we can
go ahead and kick off.
Just get our recording and,
Get into the...
Ready?
Me.
All right, Dr. Rumpakis, we're going to start the broadcast.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for attending our latest OptiPort Best Practices web conference, Cracking the Code, Final Preparations for ICD 10. As you all know, our industry is facing major changes this year, including the changeover from ICD 9 to ICD 10 this October. As the first major change to the codes in over 30 years, this has the potential to affect all areas of your practice. As you know, OptiPort is about building better eye care practices. We focus on growth strategies in the area of sales, marketing, training, managed vision care, leadership management, and access to experts like on today's call, Dr. Rumpakis. And all of these business growth tools in our community are funded via cost savings through our group purchasing programs. I want to talk about one quick event coming up for OptiPort in a couple of weeks, and this is our Spark conference at Vision Expo West. Again, this will be an all-day meeting on Wednesday the 16th, and seats are filling up fast. So if you have not yet registered for the conference, please do so via the OptiPort member-only website, or you can email us at events@optiport.com to secure your spot. I'm going to be handing it over to Dr. Rumpakis here in just a moment to talk about the ICD-10 changeover, but I do want to cover some quick logistics first. We are going to get some great info and valuable tools from this web conference, but we also want this to be interactive. So if you have a question, you can type it in the question box on the right-hand side of your screen, and we will do our best to have Dr. Rumpakis answer this either during the call or during a brief Q&A session at the end. And if you're experiencing any technical difficulties during the presentation, please feel free to let us know via the question box as well, and an OptiPort team member will assist you. Finally, this is Dave Trask, and you will also or may also be hearing from a few others at OptiPort, and we will have Aaron Meyer managing our Q&A and question box. And now I would like to start introducing our special guest and good friend of OptiPort, Dr. John Rumpakis. He recently presented at our annual Managing Managed Care workshop in Chicago, and his presentation was one of the most well-received sessions of the whole day. For those of you who missed that meeting, Dr. Rumpakis is the President and CEO of Practice Resource Management, Inc., a consulting firm for eye care professionals. His medical coding expertise and experience is robust. He currently serves as the Chief Medical Coding Editor for both Review of Optometry and Optometric Management, so you may have seen some of his work in those publications. He also works as a medical coding consultant and has developed medical and eye care coding software to help practices with their billing. And now I will pass it off to our expert in this area, Dr. Rumpakis. It's all yours.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. Dave, that's a very nice introduction. I think maybe I'm going to have you tell my wife all of that stuff so she understands how busy I am all the time. So anyways, it's a great opportunity to be here today. We are 28 days and counting to the ICD-10, and it's something that I think that many practices are looking forward to. We've been doing a lot of work, and I know much credit to the OptiPort team. When we presented at the annual conference, one of the things that we definitely got feedback on from all of the attendees is that by attending that conference, we were actually able to disseminate information that really eliminated a lot of anxiety that people have about the ICD-10s. And I guess the best way I can say it to everybody here is I really think that the ICD-10 is going to be like Y2K. It's going to come, it's going to go. You're going to be just fine. There's going to be some, little hiccups along the road, but not really the major disruption that a lot of people are really talking about. And it's just one of those things that I don't think we need to worry about so much. We obviously have to have a plan in play, and that's what we're going to address today. Dave did a great job about talking about my background, and as everybody knows, I do consulting for a lot of companies, and he really said it better than I could. Everything that I'm going to talk about today, if fee shows up in one of our clinical cases, it's the 2015 national average Medicare maximum allowable for each procedure as of today. When we talk about policies, we'll be talking about them specific to what's current as of today. And please remember, again, just in consistency with the very last bullet point, when we go through a coding example, it is just an example. It's an illustration. It is, if you were to change any of the clinical information or history or anything, obviously all of the coding would possibly change as well. So we're going to lead you through those, but just remember that you always take care of the patient that's in your chair, not worried about the diagnosis so much to base your coding off of. Just take care of the patient that's directly in front of you. Our objectives and everything that we've had are the same as what we've had before. We want to talk about the genesis. We're going to go through some brief review of what we've covered before, so it'll be very, very quick on some of the front end, and then we'll get into the posterior segment, clinical cases, because as you know, in our second installment, we covered the anterior segment, clinical cases. So again, our learning objectives, and really what we're going to want to focus on is that the ICD-10 is not just a billing tool. Remember, it's something that actually is a legal requirement for us to follow. HIPAA requires that we follow all of the rules of the CPT and of the ICD system. So it's just one of those things I want you to keep in mind as we're going through. It's not an optional type of a choice. You can't say, well, I want to do it or I don't want to do it. Everybody is mandated to be able to go through this type of a change. I'm just going to say it's September of 2015. Right now, you need to be online getting your resources. You're going to need a 2016 CPT book. You will need a 2016 ICD-10 book. You will need a 2016 HCPCS Level 2 book. All of those books combined will cost you probably close to $170. A very, very small investment in being able to have the rules that are there. Now, we've talked about CodeSafe Plus in the past, and it's an online resource. And while it is probably the most thorough online resource available, it still can't reproduce the books in its entirety because there are certain pieces of information that the AMA and the World Health Organization have copyrighted that we're not allowed to reproduce. Okay? My email addresses, and for any of you who need them, please make sure, I know you can contact Aaron and get contact information, and I really actually prefer questions go through the OptiPort management, so that way we can actually disseminate that information to everybody. So, we want to make sure that we can fight big technology. We've talked about our systems. Let's get into a brief review in the time that we have remaining. So, the most frequent question I always get is, how do I code a particular situation? Well, remember that if you just take care of the patient, the code will actually take care of itself. The patient's presentation and their condition determines everything that you do with them. So remember, you're going to have a patient-specific history, a patient-specific examination, an assessment of the condition. So that's where the ICD-10 starts to correlate now with the examination that you actually provided. And remember, what you do actually determines what you write in your record, and what you write in your record determines the codes that you use. So the bottom line is that the individual patient presentation is what's key. We do not code by diagnosis, meaning I don't do the same thing on everybody that's got primary open-angle glaucoma of mild severity. I treat each independent patient differently. So what is the ICD-10 all about? Again, we've reviewed this many times, but it's a new standard in medical record creation, data analysis, and medical economics, because where the ICD-10 is going to lead us in the next 3 to 5 years, it's to the transformation of our healthcare system. And it's just one cog in the wheel of a multi-decade process of moving us to a different type of healthcare system overall. The hardest part about the ICD-10 has nothing to do with converting the code. Converting the code is going to be the easiest thing that you ever have to do with the ICD-10. The most difficult thing is going to be changing how you create a medical record, because your medical record now is going to need to be detailed enough to support the increased detail and specificity of that diagnosis code. Why do practices experience a 20% reduction in productivity when the ICD-10 is implemented? Is because it takes more time to write things down. That's the primary reason. It's not that the ICD-10 is difficult. It's a little more different, but definitely not difficult overall. So a brief review. You know the ICD-9s, as we mentioned, have been around for 30 plus years. Only 5 digits of specificity. There's only 14,000 of them, so we're running out of ability to be specific about what's going on with the actual patient themselves. There are some rules, as we've talked about in the past, so we always have to have a critical relationship between the ICD code and the CPT code that you're using. Remember that you always are going to code a systemic disease first and an ocular sequela second. Remember that you cannot use the patient's symptoms as a diagnosis, so things like decreased vision or eye pain. Remember, you're going to actually have to code what's wrong with the patient. I've got a corneal forum body. That's creating the eye pain, right? That's why we've got a, that symptom. But we always code the diagnosis. And remember, our linkage is very important. One critical thing that I find to be coming up as a question all the time, and I have to apologize because I've never seen this as an issue, but I want to make sure that everybody realizes you can map multiple CPT codes or multiple ICD-10 codes or ICD-9 codes to a single CPT code. So if your examination is related to diabetic macular edema, background diabetic retinopathy, you can map your examination to those 2 diagnoses. So don't think that you're limited on one diagnosis per CPT code. Okay, so we know that we have to always have something that supports medical necessity. Let's go back a couple of years, and I'm going to take us now kind of through the glaucoma thinking of this, because remember, back in 2012, the formal code of glaucoma suspect formally disappeared. 365.0 was replaced with a new way of thinking. And what they were trying to get us to do is to think, okay, it's not just good enough for that patient to be a glaucoma suspect, but doctor, we want you to tell us what kind of suspect that they are, and can you please start to assign risk? All right, is it low risk, high risk? Is it somebody who's got angle closure without damage? Anatomically narrow angle with primary closure suspect. And then they introduced the concept here of these glaucoma stages or stages of severity. So when you actually had a confirmed disease over here, for example, 365.11, primary open-angle glaucoma, they now want you to tell them what stage that glaucoma is. As we all know, as we move to the ICD-10 system, it's going to be much easier as we do things. Now I'm just going to go into CodeSafe Plus just to show you why this transformation is going to be so important. We're just going ahead and updating a profile that I've created specifically for this webinar today, and we'll go ahead and click on that screen and click on there. And let's go ahead and just put in primary open-angle glaucoma, 365.11, right? You see it right here, primary open-angle glaucoma. I'm going to click on it, and I'm going to click Convert this code. So you can see instantly I've got my ICD-10s. So when I said that converting the code is the least of your issues, it's perfectly easy. There's a lot of great technologies out there. But what I want you to note is now in a single ICD-10 code, not only do we have type of disease, but we have stage of disease as well, right? Type of disease, stage of disease in a single code. If I translate back to the ICD-9, you'll see that that goes to 2 separate ICD-9 codes, which we're very, very aware of. Now let's go ahead and look at something with laterality, low tension open angle glaucoma as an example. You'll notice not only do I have type of disease, low tension glaucoma, but I also have location of disease, right eye, and stage of disease, moderate. So the ICD-10s are now going to be much more specific when we're actually doing different things like that, so that way we can tell the healthcare system exactly what's going on. So let's kind of get into the format again, very, very fast overview. Remember that October 1 is the implementation date. Why October 1? Because October 1 is the anniversary date of the entire ICD calendar year. So remember, prior to the big hubbub about ICD-10, the major release of ICD-9 codes came every October 1, and there's quarterly revisions, January 1, April 1, July 1, and then the annual revision again on October 1. So please expect that while the initial release of ICD-10 will be coming out on October 1, you will be having a minor revision to the ICD-10 codes on January 1, April 1, July, all right, until the next major update of October 1st, 2016. So again, remember, we are one of the last countries coming into play with the ICD-10. It's just because we've not released our data on morbidity statistics and mortality statistics of the World Health Organization. The ICD-10 contains many, many more codes, about 70,000, and it's organized in a much more logical way for us to actually use. It's harmonized in the United States to be consistent with other broad classifications. So we have revised diabetes codes to be consistent with the American Diabetes Association categories. Excuse me. The specificity that we're going to have primarily pertains to laterality. So think about it in eye care. We have left, right, upper lid, lower lids. That's it. So we're not really overly burdened with laterality issues or specificity. Injury codes do require a little bit more work, right? They want us to tell us what are the external causes of the injury and what phase of treatment that patient is actually in. Are they under active management? Are they under a follow-up visit? Or am I actually treating a sequela to a given problem? So certain standards that are in place, as we've talked about before, remember that certain standards, if it's an ocular code, that if a 1, 2, or 3 appear in the 5th or 6th position, it tells us the laterality. 9 and 0 typically stand for unspecified or indeterminate. So remember that we have some standards. Central corneal ulcer, right here. H16 tells me it's an I code. 16.01 tells me it's a central corneal ulcer. The 3 here tells me that's a bilateral code. Injuries are grouped by anatomical site, which makes it much easier to search for different things. And we know that we don't want to get in the habit of using an unspecified code. We have been told many times that if we use an unspecified code, the payer will withhold payment. And so I want you to be able to recognize, while CMS is going to give us some leniency, which I'll explain in a second, it doesn't mean that we can use an unspecified code. So please still be as specific as you possibly can. Remember that the ICD-10 is all about data. It's going to determine the incidence of disease, cost of treatment of disease, and appropriateness of treatment for specific types of disease. So healthcare systems are going to be relying upon practitioners across the country of every discipline to supply this data. There are still some conditions or some clinical circumstances where an unspecified code may still be the very best code to use. Very rare, but it still may come up. The bottom line is that ICD-10s are going to be a little bit different. Not hard, just different. Formatted, right, 7 characters long, that's okay. We can deal with that. Each character has a specific meaning. The other nice thing is we know that when we're going to do conversions, 88% of the time you're going to have a very good correlation to an ICD-10 if you're converting from an ICD-9. So again, if I'm working in a system where I just want to type in myopia, right, and I say I want to show the ICD-9s for myopia, great, there I go. I want to click on a code, convert it, right? It points me directly to where I need to go. So conversion is going to be extremely, extremely easy as you actually get into using the system, all right? The chapters organized from front of the eye to the back of the eye. So what I want you to pay attention to is really today we're going to be working from H30 all the way back to the back of the eye, because we're going to be working with all of this, you know, through these categories, because those are the categories in the back of the eye. Notice that the numbers numerically increase as we move from anterior to posterior segment. The format is different. Remember that the category of the disease is located in the 3 characters before the decimal point. Remember that the specificity appears in the 4 characters after the decimal point. Please keep in mind that if you get a letter X here, here, or here, it's designated as a placeholder. That's simply just taking the spot, so that way the 7th character can always appear in the 7th spot over here. All right? So please just be aware, a lowercase x to the right of the decimal is a placeholder. When we look at glaucoma again, let's read the code from left to right. I know that if it has an H, it's a disease of the eye and ocular adnexa. Understand that if it's category 40, it's actually deemed as being glaucoma. Now, what kind of glaucoma? Well, if I have a 3 right here, this digit tells me what kind of glaucoma I have. What does the 2 in the 5th spot mean? If it's an H code, it's going to now tell me what? Laterality, so that's the left eye. The AX is a placeholder, so that way the severity indicator can always appear in the 7th spot. So remember, severity goes from 1, mild, 2, moderate, 3, severe. All right? There are certain exclusions that we'll talk about today. Primarily, we're going to talk about the diabetic categories a little bit. But one of the things I want you to realize is that exclusions really mean that these are systemic diseases or diseases of other areas but have an ocular manifestation. That's why they are not technically a disease of the eye and ocular adnexa. So bacterial infections are going to appear as A codes, viral infections, B codes. When we're thinking about the back of the eye, right? Choroidal nevus is going to be in the D category because it's a non-malignant or a benign neoplasm. There's no such thing as senile cataract anymore. I guess the ICD-10 has gone PC, and now that's listed as age-related. And you'll see these as we go through things. So if I'm looking at diabetes, and I just want you to think about the ICD-9 system for a second, right? The ICD-9 system requires 3 codes for me to code this particular entity. If I had diabetic retinopathy, diabetic macular edema, and the patient had systemic diabetes, I would need 3 different codes. In the ICD-10 system, what do I need? A single code. E tells me that it's an endocrine disease. 1 tells me it's diabetes. 1-1 tells me it's type 2. So if I was E10, it would be type 1. E11, type 2. After the decimal point comes the additional specificity. If I had E11.9, it would tell me that I have type 2 diabetes without complications. But since I have a number here that's other than a 9, what is it going to tell me? It's going to tell me that it's type 2 diabetes with ophthalmic complications. What kind of ophthalmic complications? Non-proliferative. Macular edema, yes, or macular edema, no. So if I had a 1, it's with macular edema. If I had a 9, it's no macular edema. Routine eye exam, if you're using the V72 codes, those are going to change. Remember that these things are just going to be different. So again, what you're used to versus what you're going to get used to. So in general, very, very simple for us to do those conversions, and I really wouldn't worry about that overall. Cataract, as you can see, it changes. Now please note that we don't have severity on cataract, right? We have laterality, but not severity. So even though you are using an internal grading system to grade that as a 1, 2, 3, or 4, you're not going to be able to relate that at this point in time to an age-related nuclear cataract. Some types of things we're going to have, again, like I showed you earlier, type of disease, location of disease, and then stage of disease. So don't get overwhelmed by your choices. It's very easy to tell simply what your patient has and then match it up with the appropriate diagnosis code overall. Diabetes, again, fairly straightforward for what we're doing. One thing to note on diabetes, since it's posterior segment, notice that if I am an E09, E11 or E13, and the patient is using insulin, we also have to code Z79.4 on that claim, so that way the carrier knows that that patient is not necessarily an insulin-dependent diabetic, right, type 1, but they are using insulin for these other types, all right? Again, remember systemic disease. If I have a systemic disease with an ocular sequela that's not a combined diagnosis, then the systemic comes first. The ocular sequela actually comes second. Chapter 19, Chapter 20 are cause of injury, type of injury, place of injury, activity of injury, okay? The most important thing with injuries, as you remember, is we have to say which phase of treatment are they actually in. Is it an initial encounter or under active treatment? Is it a follow-up encounter after the active phase of treatment, or am I actually treating a sequela of a particular disease state? Okay, so that's the most important thing there. As we know, we used these examples in webinar number 2 just to show you what that would mean. And again, cause of injury, we have to have a match with the 7th character, A, D, or S, as we're describing what's going on. Okay, so injury and trauma, just kind of keep those things in mind. So high-risk medications, I want to bring this up again since this is going to affect us from the retinal perspective. Remember, right now, if somebody has Plaquenil, if you're managing a patient who's using Plaquenil for rheumatoid arthritis, right now we use code V58.69. I just want to show you, right? So if I actually go here and I type V68, if I could type, that would be helpful, right? I want to switch to ICD 9. I apologize about that. Let me just change over really quick. ICD 9.6. Okay, so you'll notice that V58.6 is pretty general, right? V58.69 is long-term or current use of other medications. If I go to convert that code, right, I'm going to get 3 conversions. So if we're going to code directly Z79.899, other long-term current drug therapy, is what exactly we're going to be shifting to when we work right here. You're supposed to report that for Plaquenil use for rheumatoid arthritis, then also specific type of rheumatoid arthritis. Okay, so you see how that's going to change over. All right. So ICD-10. Remember, we've talked about our game plan. You should be starting. If you haven't started yet, please, we're at 28 days and counting. I really want you to start to pay attention so that way you can get on top of this. You want to print out the codes that you are currently using in your office the most frequently. Organize them in most frequent to less frequent. Break them into various categories. And then what I want you to use, whether you're using CodeSafe Plus or whatever technology you're using, and please don't rely on free ICD10.com and free ICD. Those sites are not really, I can't really give you a feeling of confidence in using them. I don't think that they give you the accuracy that you really are going to need as you're going forward. But make sure you use a conversion technology, whatever you're going to use. Create a timetable, break it down over the next 3 weeks and say, here's where I want to be at on September 30th before we start to put in place. Talk to your vendors, your EHR vendor, your clearinghouse, your insurance carriers. Find out, are they ready? What are they doing? Have they done end-to-end testing? All of that sort of thing. Most importantly, just from a management perspective, put one person in charge in your office who's going to be managing those patients or managing that information, so that way you have effective dissemination of this information throughout the office. One thing to make sure you know, CMS has granted us a leniency period for 12 months. So if you get the specificity to the right of the decimal point incorrect, that does not mean use an unspecified code, but it means that if you get the specificity incorrect, they will not withhold payment for you, okay? So that's very, very important. As long as you get the first 3 characters correct, the category of the disease, you'll still get paid. It also will not affect your quality reporting, and that's probably the most important part as we move forward into the healthcare transformation of the future. So let's go ahead and jump into our posterior segment cases. Let's go ahead and jump into glaucoma. Aaron, I see there's a question that's come up. Hello?
Yeah.
Sorry, we were on mute still.
Okay. Can you, I just see the question. I don't know what the question is. I just saw we had one.
It's not. Okay, here we go. If we don't fully diagnose to Medicare, we use the category, the first three. They will still pay, but are there any negatives for not coding to the highest specificity, such as MU, meaningful use, or PQRS?
Yes. So Medicare still wants you to code to the highest level of specificity. They're not giving you a buy on not coding. They're just giving you a leniency period and not holding your feet to the fire for being precisely accurate. So don't interpret that Medicare's leniency is that you're off the hook for being specific. You still need to be as specific as possible. They're just not going to, if you're wrong, they're just not going to penalize you, okay? So please understand that's what the leniency period was related to.
Great. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, moving on with our case, glaucoma. I've got a 43-year-old African-American male that comes in with VSP and Blue Cross, very first eye exam ever, chief complaint, having a very difficult time reading. His VAs are pretty much unaffected. He's got near-point problems. FDT was normal. NCT was a little high. Refraction was unremarkable. Near-ad was commensurate with his age and presentation. You repeated Goldman. You dilated. You went ahead and looked at the CD ratio, and you repeated Goldman again just to see if it was a misreading on the pressures. So what do you do with this patient? You know, you don't panic, right? First of all, you just go ahead and say, listen, complete the comprehensive exam, solve what the patient came in for first, right? So bill VSP for the exam and for the optical, then educate the patient on what you want them to do. How would we build this to VSP? And I purposely put some errors in here so we could start to identify things. So remember, if this was going to VSP in the ICD-9 system, I wouldn't have a diagnosis of glaucoma, open angle, borderline findings, high risk. This would be what? This would be presbyopia. In the ICD-10 system, how would I code this? So I'd have my 92004-014, my 92015, and then I'd have presbyopia as my primary, regular astigmatism in my right eye as my secondary, and then open angle with borderline findings, high risk. Notice the laterality here because the glaucoma suspect codes require laterality. Bilateral corresponds to the number 3 here in the 6th spot. Category 40 means that it's glaucoma. All right, so what would you do with this patient? Clinically, you know that you're going to have the patient back for a series of tests, right? And we won't go into it today, but yes, you can order all of these tests and perform them on the same day as your general examination, all right? So typically, that's the workup. In the ICD-10 system, again, or ICD-9, how are you going to code it? Like, same way here. You're going to list your office visit, and again, I think this office visit is way too high for what a typical practitioner would be doing 1 week after a full comprehensive eye exam. That's why I put what's wrong with this claim. The office visit probably wouldn't be supported. Everything here in green means that it's subject to the Multiple Procedure Payment Reduction Act, right? And notice that everything here is all mapped to my diagnosis code. How would that look in the ICD-10? Well, since I'm now billing the medical carrier, what would I be doing? It would be my 9921X, whatever it would be, my fundus photography, gonio, visual fields, and pachymetry. My diagnoses, no different, right, than what we had initially. We assessed what's going on with the patient, it's an appropriate diagnosis, and we bill the medical carrier as such. Now again, serial tonometry, OCT are tests that are also typically done. How would those look if you were to build them? Again, I question the office visit based upon what the practitioner actually did. But again, if you were to do these things, no problem. How would I build them? No difference, right? Look it, I no difference. This is a unilateral or bilateral code, bilateral diagnosis. Therefore, everything is matched up just perfectly, okay? So again.
Question came through on that subject, if you don't mind. Is it true that with glaucoma, that if you code the severe stage, you will not be paid for special testing such as OCTs as often as moderate stage glaucoma?
That is true, and the reason is, just so everybody knows, is because OCT is not the primary test of choice if somebody has advanced glaucoma. If somebody has advanced or severe glaucoma, visual fields is the clinically appropriate test, not OCT. That's why stage of glaucoma, type of glaucoma have to match and correlate with the procedures themselves. So that's a evidence-based medicine comment that's come out of clinical studies, not John Rumpakis' opinion, but that is correct on what the individual asked. So why can't we do certain things like fundus photography and OCT on the same day? Here's the reason why. This is the set of rules that we do, the NCCI edits. There's many different types of rules that come into play that govern what we do and what we can't do. And so normally, you can't do these types of things all on the same day. And let's just show you what that looks like in real time here. We have a great little module that allows us to be able to do that. We'll actually just type in our workup, right? 92004, 92015, 92020. Well, let's go ahead and put visual fields. Let's put fundus photography. Let's put pachymetry. Let's put OCT of the optic nerve. And let's put OCT of the anterior segment. And I can click one button, and our technology will tell you immediately what codes you can and cannot do on the same day. So we double-check your zip code, we double-check the national rule set, and we display what rules are applicable to you in your zip code. So you notice that you do have some conflicts that exist out there, but it's one of those things that you're going to have to mouse over the individual conflict to see exactly what's going on with it, so that way you know the rule sets that apply to it. So for example, fundus photography and OCT, it's an active rule. Anterior segment OCT, posterior segment OCT, it's an inactive rule, right? So it's not being actively enforced. Those things are very important to know as you're actually developing your clinical protocols overall. So, I hear people all the time saying that they're using modifiers to get around the rules, and it makes my skin crawl when I hear people talking about that, because we don't want to get around the rules, we want to follow the rules. And so when you're using things like modifier 59 to override certain things, you have an obligation legally to make sure that you're meeting the definition of the modifier. If you're not meeting the definition of the modifier, then you are prohibited from using it, or if you're using it inappropriately with knowledge that it's inappropriate, now you're actually guilty of a fraudulent service. So please make sure that you understand before you use any modifier that you need to make sure that it's the most appropriate modifier to use, okay? Modifier 59 is the #1 flagged modifier by the Office of Inspector General. Modifier 59, as everybody knows, is being replaced by the X codes. The X modifiers are coming out, or they came out, past January. They are now, to be more specific, instead of 59, you would say this is a separate encounter, separate structure. And no, that does not work for the back of the eye, because the back of the eye, the retina, macula, or optic nerve, anterior segment, are all considered to be the same structure. Okay, so it's not a separate organ or structure within the eye. So again, the X codes really are, we're going to have trouble applying those to eye care, and Medicare has said if you can't use an X code, then use modifier 59, but please make sure you meet the definition of using it. So again, we don't want to bypass the rules. You want to make sure that legitimately you're doing things appropriately. The only time that I've seen fundus photography and OCT of the retina, not OCT of the optic nerve, but OCT of the retina allowed, is specifically when the patient actually has an emergent situation where they are at the risk of losing sight. You're going to have a macular bleed, something like that, and it's imperative that you actually perform those two services on the same date of service on the same patient. So again, remember, it's not just because you want to, or because it's convenient for the patient, or because you can use a modifier to get you paid. You're obligated to meet the definition of doing that. So let's go back to our case. What would I do now after I've done all of my testing? I'm going to come back to the patient, and I'm either going to confirm the diagnosis or tell them that they don't have things, right? So let's say this patient actually progressed to glaucoma. What do I do with him now when I bring him back? Well, I may be doing tonometry, looking at the optic nerve, those sorts of things. In the ICD-9 system, remember I'm going to come up with two diagnoses, primary open-angle glaucoma, mild stage glaucoma. In the ICD-10, it's going to look a little different. Here's my office visit. Here's my diagnosis. Notice that there is no laterality with primary open-angle glaucoma because by definition, it is a bilateral disease. So what do we do in a bilateral disease state if the right eye has mild stage and the left eye has moderate stage? You always code to the highest level of severity. Code to the worst eye. So if the right eye was mild, left eye was moderate, this would be H40.11X2 showing moderate disease. You always code to the worst eye. And again, you're monitoring your clinical care with the patient doesn't change at all, right? I'm seeing the patient down the road 6 months. Maybe I'm repeating serial tonometry on them after I've got them stabilized on their medication. Again, how do I code it? No different than what you're doing. I'm just using a different ICD-10 code here instead of doing two ICD-9 codes as you would do currently. You're following the patient just through the entire year. No difference with what you're doing clinically, just in how you describe it. So again, I always think that things are made so much more, they're made to sound so much more difficult in the ICD-10s, and I don't think that they really are. So if we tend to take a look at what happened in the first year, I build my exam and my refraction to VSP. I followed the patient up for a diagnostic visit, a secondary visit, and maybe I saw them the first year 4 times. Why? Well, because they're a new glaucoma patient. They've never been to the doctor. I'm worried about compliance. He's African American. He's got a higher risk level. So those sorts of things are important for me to note. What does this pay? According to CMS national standards, about $1,037 in the first year of care. Second years of care, about $588 overall. If it was a non-Medicare carrier, about $1,800 in the first year and about $1,000 every year after that, okay? Based upon that care profile. Of course, you're going to code your patient and have them back and do the test that your patient actually requires. Do not use this as a cookbook for how to manage your glaucoma patient. Age-related macular degeneration. I've got a 72-year-old white female that shows up that has no refractive insurance and Medicare only. Chief complaint, I'm here for my annual eye exam. I got my recall card. Big problem we know if it's Medicare only, right? So irrespective of what her findings are, so she's hyperopic, she's presbyopic, she's got some astigmatism, right? She also has some metamorphopsia, and she's showing some pigmentary changes consistent with dry macular degeneration in her right eye. Left eye is clear. So again, how do I code that in the ICD-9 system? Non-exudative senile macular degeneration, my exam, my refraction, and as we know, because I wrote down annual exam in the chief complaint, unfortunately that patient is going to be having to pay for her comprehensive exam out of pocket. We didn't do our job right in recording what was going on from the year previous, okay, or we didn't do a good enough job in our case history. Okay, so how would I code things? And again, typo, this should be 92014 right there. I apologize. But she had hyperopia, astigmatism, presbyopia, right? So those are all appropriate. And then non-exudative age-related macular degeneration. Now note, I'm going to show you the full amount of codes for macular degeneration. Let's just go ahead and search. So if I'm going to go here and I'm going to look for macular degeneration, or let's just type it in actually. Let's just do a search. Right? So if I've got non-exudative macular degeneration, I'm going to click on that and I'm going to go ahead and convert to an ICD-10. Notice that there's only one code. There is no laterality. There's no severity. Very interesting, I think, okay? But I just want to let you know, don't try to create severity. Don't try to create laterality. We're obviously working with the most current set. The new set of codes don't actually go into place until October 1. We'll see if there's actual changes in that as we move forward, okay? So what do? If I'm doing genetic testing, I can order it. I don't bill for it, of course. That's a lab test that the clinical lab is paying for. But if I'm seeing the patient, and again, I order whatever clinical tests that I think are appropriate for that patient. If I wanted to be able to do OCT testing, I could certainly do OCT testing. But I want to ask you a question. What's wrong with this claim? Which eye does she have macular degeneration on? Her right eye. So why am I taking a picture of both? I need to make sure that you guys understand that if you're going to only order the test, if the patient only has pathology on one eye, remember that your imagery that you order only has to be specific for the eye that you're doing it on. Visual fields is determined to be unilateral or bilateral. Fundus photography is actually bilateral by definition. So what would be appropriate? 92250-52-RT. All right, so that way that code would now indicate that I'm only doing it on the right eye. Visual fields, since it's unilateral or bilateral, I don't have to adjust my coding on at all. Again, I just follow the patient up through my typical workup, whatever I'm going to do with them, I just see them. If they have any complaints, I obviously see them based on a certain frequency. Maybe I see them twice a year, 3 times a year, whatever you feel is appropriate. On a national average, that's what macular degeneration pays for if you're actually working the patient up and coding it appropriately. Diabetes. I've got a 35-year-old white male, VSP, 55 years old, Blue Cross. Chief complaint, PCP told him that he has just a little diabetes and he should get his eyes checked. Right, so this patient presents, and so I'm going to always say, wait, let's find out, who am I going to bill, right? Is this a medical visit or a refractive visit? For all of you who are automatically assuming that it's a medical visit, I need you to just stop for a second. You could be putting yourself at risk. Here's what really it depends on. If the vision plan is attached to the medical plan and your contract says that the medical plan wants to be primary, then you bill it medically. If the vision plan is not attached to the medical plan at all, it's just a disassociated plan that the patient purchased, then it's the patient's choice on which benefit they want to use. Because what service are you doing? You're doing a, what? 92004. VSP pays for 92004, so does Blue Cross. The only difference is Blue Cross will probably pay you more. So fortunately, most of the time, not all of the time, but most of the time, this will go medical because your contract requires that the medical be primary. But please, you need to be aware of that on a patient-by-patient basis in your office. So again, what does the patient have? Some hyperopia, astigmatism, presbyopia, and you have some background diabetic retinopathy. So how do I code it? ICD-9, I say that the patient has, right, systemic diabetes with ophthalmic complications, and they also have background diabetic retinopathy. In the ICD-10 system, what do? They have hyperopia, astigmatism, and presbyopia. They have E11.321. E11, remember, was type 2 diabetes, 3, ophthalmic complications, mild background diabetic, or mild non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy, 1 with some mild macular edema. If this was a 9, it would not have any macular edema at all. Then again, what am I going to end up doing in this case? I'm working the patient up in any way that you think is appropriate, okay? So whatever you're going to do, I just want you to make sure. I have a systemic disease. I have changes in both eyes. Therefore, the 92250 is appropriate to do on both eyes. No problem. I don't have to modify that code at all. So again, I'm just following my case through just like I would normally follow it through my CPT codes. All of that doesn't change. I'm just simply working with my ICD-10 to better explain what's going on with the patient themselves. No difference with this, right? So as I'm working the patient up, it's not unusual, right? If they had mild retinopathy or severe retinopathy, this may be truncated a little bit because I may need to refer them out for some laser or additional therapy, all right? So remember, all these rules that we had with the ICD-9 system are not going to play a role in the ICD-10 because I don't have to use dual diagnoses. The ICD-10 automatically encompasses that. So all of this stuff that was expanded in 2005 that we're used to using, we don't have to worry about anymore. Let's do a case with choroidal nevus, okay? 38-year-old Asian female presents with VSP and Aetna. Routine exam, no problems. Annual examination by recall. Again, just because I find something with her does not mean that this is actually a medical encounter, right? So you have a nevus in the right eye. The patient was rescheduled for follow-up, okay? Not sure what you might be doing. This is how I would diagnose it, but again, I've got something wrong here, right? It's not what I found. It's not what I found that determines who's billable. It's what the patient presented with. So this would be incorrect. This would be actually a refractive diagnosis, and that would actually go to VSP. So my 92004-014, my 92015, my refractive diagnoses would go there. This would still be in her medical record, but would not be submitted actually to VSP, right? So notice I've got a benign neoplasm of the right choroid. So I do have laterality here. So again, if I'm doing my fundus photograph here, what should I be doing correctly? I should be indicating that it's a unilateral procedure. I've dumbed it down, and I'm going to charge only 50%, right? I can't charge the full amount because I'm only doing half of the actual definition. So again, no difference with how we work that patient up or what you do overall. It's exactly the same clinical tests, clinical protocols that you're currently using now with your CPT codes. It's just that I'm becoming now much more specific, right? Correct with the ICD-10 codes. Notice that the 1 is showing here laterality with the right eye. So again, how do we know what's going on? We can actually read that code. So again, you're just following the patient up, however you're seeing them throughout the course, right, of doing things. So here's a couple of things I want you to think about. If in the next 28 days you say to yourself, you know, I've got great intentions, we're going to get this done, but you don't actually do anything, then you're not going to really make a difference, right? If Nike's slogan was just think about it, hell, we'd all be successful, but it's not. Nike's slogan is just do it. So I really need you guys in this crunch time to really start getting your plan together and start executing it appropriately, right? Because it's not enough to have good intentions, but you need to be able to figure out how you're going to integrate this change and implement it effectively within your practice. Only then will it have true impact on what you're doing and how you're coded, and eventually how you're going to get paid by third-party payers down the road, okay? So here's my 10-step plan, right? So now you're an ICD-10 specialist. I want you, again, just like I talked about earlier, make sure you've got everything printed out. Make sure you separate things. Make sure you use your conversion technology. You've got, 4 weeks left. How are you going to break those codes up that you use most commonly into a system, right? Talk to people. Make those phone calls. Send those emails out to your clearinghouse, your EHR, your contracted carriers. And that's including medical and vision. Don't forget workers' comp, right? Workers' comp is going to be very specific about what they want. And again, develop a strategy for monitoring these changes, because just because we're introducing the ICD-10 does not mean that the event is over. This is a process. The entire healthcare system is changing. The ICD-10s are simply just one part of that. Okay, so I know that it was a lunch hour, and I'm sorry for going so fast, but I wanted to make sure that I ended up just a little bit early, because I know that we don't have the luxury of being at the end of the day like we typically have had. We just want to make sure that we gave you guys adequate time throughout the lunch hour. So, Erin, were there any other questions that came in?
Not right now. If you want to send us any follow-up questions, we can reach out and get those out to attendees as well.
Fantastic. Well, then I would just like to say thank you to everybody for coming today. I wish you the most success in the next 3 weeks and beyond. Again, let's approach this rationally. Let's not panic. Let's make sure that we are actually, approaching it in a pragmatic way that you're going to be able to integrate it appropriately into your practice. And I think all of you will agree with me. If we talk in a couple of months, you're going to say, you know what, John, you were right. This was more Y2K than the apocalypse. So with that, everybody, I wish you the best of success and have a good rest of your day. Bye-bye. And just to remind everybody, you have your Spark conference coming up at Vision Expo West on September 16th. Make sure that you register on the OptiPort website. It's really important. As you know, OptiPort supports you in a number of different ways and really excels in being a market leader. And send your questions to Aaron. Thanks again.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Rumpakis.
Thank you.